Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I hope everybody had a lovely lunch. My name is Sarah Kate Ellis. I am the President and CEO of GLAAD. GLAAD is the most visible LGBTQI civil society organization. We work with the news, business, entertainment, faith leaders, sports, governments, and individual activists from around the globe to ensure and educate public people on LGBTQ issues and move policy forward. I've been running GLAAD for 8 years now, and prior to that, I was a media executive at Time Inc. in the United States and Condé Nast. I'm also married to my wife, Kristen, and we have twin 13-year-olds that we're raising. That's another full-time job. But today, I'm really proud to sit on WEF's Power of Media Task Force, and GLAAD is a very proud partner of the Partnership for Global LGBTQI Equality, which is also known as PGLE. And PGLE was launched right here in 2019 and is a project of WEF and the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Before we begin, I want to spell out what LGBTQI actually means, what that acronym is for, because it's different in different cultures. Here, when we're speaking today, it's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex. You'll also see a plus oftentimes at the end of it, and that's for everyone with diverse sexual orientations or gender identities. So it's being all inclusive. While there have been landmark rulings to advance LGBTQI equality in more and more countries, the human rights situation of LGBTQI people remains a grave concern, and that's why we're here today. Progress has been uneven. At least 69 countries still criminalize gay and lesbian relations between consenting adults. And social shocks and economic crises have exacerbated patterns of social and economic exclusion. In an increasingly pulverized world, some governments are using anti-LGBTQ rhetoric to advance their political agendas, which negatively impacts the lives of LGBTQI people. The United States CDC, Center for Disease Control, shockingly found that 1 in 4 LGBTQ young people attempted suicide last year. Attempted. Violence facing transgender people around the globe continues to rise, and in the United States, transgender people are 11 percentage points less likely to be employed than others. The chokehold of COVID-19 and the pandemic and the economic crisis that followed has revealed once again how LGBTQ people who already face healthcare discrimination and economic marginalization are disproportionately hit hard. The IMF contends that an economy is more fragile and less resilient when it is not inclusive. This idea will become increasingly apparent because younger people are more open about being LGBTQI. In the US, the Gallup poll this year showed that over 20% of Gen Z are LGBT. That is up over 5 points from just last year, in 1 year. Creating more equitable and inclusive societies isn't just the right thing to do. As the evidence shows, it's an important part of the economic strategy focused on resilience and recovery. So before we hear from our panelists on this topic, I want to remind everyone that 1, this discussion is being live streamed on the World Economic Forum's public website. We are happy to have a truly global audience today. If you plan on sharing this session in social media, please use the hashtag WEForum22. So let's get to it. The panelists. First, I'd like to start at the end. We have Sander van Noort, Chief Executive Officer and Chair of the Executive Board at Randstad. We have Christiana Riley, member of the Managing Board, Chief Executive Officer, America's Deutsche Bank. Next to her, we have Amit Paley, CEO and Executive Director of the Trevor Project. And then right here to my left, we have Asha Karga, Executive Vice President who heads the brand and customer experience at the Mahindra Group, and also serves as the chairperson of the Gender Diversity Council at Mahindra. So the objective of today's session is to highlight what specific and tangible steps companies need to take to empower LGBTQI communities and become true partners to our very resilient community. Let's start with a round of introductory questions. I'll start with you, Sander. I'd like to know, has the business community gone far enough in its efforts to safeguard the LGBTQI community since you entered the workplace?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it is actually a question I'm going to answer it from a number of different perspectives. But first of all, since I entered the workspace, which is like 1987, so that's like 35 years ago, and I would say we've made tremendous progress. When I joined the workspace, I got a little brochure of Arthur Andersen in those days. That dates me to this, one of the predecessors of Accenture, for those of you who don't know. I got a little booklet. I didn't know the company. I joined the company, and it was not so clear what was going on, and there was rumors of someone being gay somewhere, you know, on the 6th floor, like that. Today, if you would join Accenture or Randstad, which is my current company, you will go on the website. You will see LGBTQ people. You will see an ERG around LGBTQ people. You'll see participations of companies in prides. I mean, so you see people like yourself, basically. And that is what young people, or people in general who are joining companies, they're looking for companies, and they want to see people like themselves, because they want to have the assurance that they will be joining a company where they feel at home. I looked at one statistic. In 1996, 4% of the Fortune 500 had something around LGBT, LGBTQ in their non-discriminatory policies, only 4%. In 2019, it was 91%. So, wow. So there is notable progress. But then the question then next is, how high do you set the bar? You use the word safeguard. I don't think that's the right word. Because that sounds like we need to protect people. No, we need people to feel at home at work. We need people to feel that they belong at work. They don't have to leave anything by the door. That's not just safeguard. They need to thrive. They need to be their best. They need to, because work is about work. They need to perform. And you can only do that if you feel safe and you belong. And if you then look at people joining companies, I was trying to look up the statistic, but still a significant number of people, also in companies such as Randstad and Accenture and IBM and Microsoft, when they join the company from college, they sort of think, maybe I'll go back in the closet, at least for the first couple of weeks. Because I don't know what's happening here in this company. I just need to suss it out a little bit. I've had a few young folks talking to me about that. So have we done enough? There's more work to be done. And I would say the last thing is, and you started by LGBTQIA plus. It's also a bit of a moving target. Yeah, it's not only about the white gay guys anymore. It's about a much broader spectrum of people. So the bar is definitely high, and I don't think we're there yet. And then I come to the last point is the business community. Well, there is no such thing as the business community. I would say the Fortune 500 companies have generally done, and big companies and big government institutions, also the police and the army and the fire department, have generally done a good job. But that's only a fraction of business. because you have a lot of small businesses. You have businesses in countries where the Fortune 500 are not. So probably fewer people work in LGBTQ plus friendly companies than in all the other than in not so friendly companies. So I think if the objective is everybody should feel at home, feel belonging in their work, in their work around the globe, my sense is that we are probably at 10%
Wow.
of people. But this is just my sort of over the. So I think there's a lot more work to do. So in summary, we have made great progress. Leading companies have done a lot, but there is so much more to do.
That's great. And that leads us right to you, Amit, right? So there's a lot more work, according to Sander, to do. What are some key insights on the risks faced by and protection of the LGBTQ community? What is the outlook on inclusion and equity based on these current insights?
I think it's a mixed bag. We've seen some huge steps forward, and including in business and some government policies, but we know that LGBTQ people are still suffering every day around the globe, and that we've actually seen a retrenchment and a moving back on rights that we thought might have been solidified. At the Trevor Project, we're the world's largest suicide prevention and mental health organization for LGBTQ young people, and we hear every single day from LGBTQ youth who are struggling. We estimate that more than 40 million LGBTQ young people seriously consider suicide every single year around the globe. 40 million. These are kids whose lives are on the line, and it's because of the discrimination and rejection that they face in society. That's a function of government policies, that's a function of business policies, that's a function of culture and family rejection that leads to that sense that you do not belong and makes you think, is there a place for me in this world? And I think what's been so upsetting the past couple years, as so many people, especially marginalized people, young people, people of color, transgender and non-binary people, have been dealing with the impact of COVID-19, this global pandemic that is harming so many people in so many ways. That's had enormous impact. At the same time, we are seeing people in government, lawmakers, attack LGBTQ people. That's happening around the globe in Eastern Europe and other places. But in the United States, which I think a lot of people want to look to as hopefully a beacon for what we can be doing on the LGBTQ front, we've seen more than 300 bills attacking LGBTQ people just in the recent time, and they've particularly been attacking transgender and non-binary young people. That's just wrong, and that's causing harm to businesses, to the public, to individuals. And so I'm hoping we can talk more about what everyone here can do, what businesses, but also people in their individual lives and government and lawmakers can do to change policy and change culture to save lives of LGBTQ people.
Yeah, wow. So mounting pressures here. To you, Christiana, as Amit just mentioned the disproportionate effect of this global crisis, these global crises that we've been talking about for the past few days here at Davos on the LGBTQI community. How can business ensure that crisis response and economic recovery programs are more inclusive and don't exacerbate the patterns of social and economic exclusion? We have an opportunity. How can we grab that right now from your perspective?
Thank you, Sarah. And first of all, let me say I'm very honored to be part of this panel, as I think acknowledgement of Deutsche Bank's decades-long commitment to an LGBTQI inclusive environment in the workplace. And I loved what you said at the outset about the IMF statistic that economies are, statistically more fragile when they don't embrace this. And I think the same is true. We've had that recognition as a company for multiple decades now. Your question about crisis, right, and what challenges, but equally what opportunities, is very poignant to the moment. As you said, we've been speaking about the crisis conditions in many sessions over the past 2 days. And the same answer is true on this situation, the application here, as it is for the geopolitical situation, which is you must stay true to your values at times of crisis. And I think corporations have 3 really important levers to think about and at their disposal to demonstrate those values. The first and foremost, Sarah, as we were talking about in our pre-discussion, is not being afraid to engage in the policymaking decision, finding the appropriate and early ways to engage, before you set off the political bomb, but even then being prepared to take the right stand, as we did in North Carolina in 2016, as we're continuing to try to do in the face of the 300 bills that are making their way through state legislatures in the United States. So that's lever number one. Don't be afraid. Levers number 2 and 3 have to be, with reflecting on your own operations. I think, the second lever I would point toward, and Sandra, you referenced this, is of course representative workforce, being sure that you're being visible as an employer on these issues. It's more than just a safe space. We think it's about showing leadership in the space and making sure that your employees see you expressing that leadership, and it's had tremendously positive impact on our employer brand, particularly in the United States. And I think the third, and this is applicable, I think, broadly across the DE&I space, is to move beyond representative workforce, right? That's kind of like the hygiene factor that gets you credibility to even, be at the table in these conversations. It's then how you reflect on bringing those values into your ecosystem, how you touch the economy. Financial services, we obviously touch the economy in many, many different ways. How do we make sure that we're partnering, we're being intentional in our client selection, we're being intentional in our vendor selection with firms who represent those same values? So I think as corporate leaders, we have a number of different levels on which we can engage, and it's important to reflect on all three of those.
That's great. And so, last but definitely not least, Asha, you've heard now from like the U.S. and the Western perspective of the challenges faced by the LGBTQI community. What's resonated with you from an Eastern perspective, and what hasn't?
So firstly, great to be here, great to be representing not just the group, but also representing India on this panel. And while you were talking about businesses and communities, actually I reflected back on our culture. And India has actually been quite inclusive as a culture. So there is a very famous Sanskrit phrase which says, Vikruti evam prakriti, which means that what seems unnatural is also natural. I'd just like you to reflect on this. This is an ancient Sanskrit phrase which actually many scholars actually believe showcases the reflection of homosexuality in our lives, in our communities. We also refer to LGBTQI+. In ancient India, there were actually 50 terms in Sanskrit, Hindi, and Tamil to actually demonstrate non-gender heterosexuals and sexualities. So these existed in the past. In our epics, which were written in the 3rd century, there were a lot of stories belonging to the homosexual community, where men married men, women married women, and therefore this representation somewhere got squashed in the invasion of India, and especially after the colonization by the British. And the entire terminology of homophobia came into act at that point in time. And therefore, the decriminalization of Section 377 just a couple of years ago brought in so much of joy and brought in so much of celebration into the community, because it was actually going back to our past, which was so rooted in all communities and all kinds of people, and the true diversity being reflected across the country. So I just wanted to share this perspective with you because, while we talk about businesses, it's deeply rooted in communities and culture, and it's important to go back into that and bring that into the fore as we start thinking about the representation in the community. So over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to do a bit of a round robin, if that's okay, because I want to hear everyone's take on this, because it keeps coming up. And I'll start down with Sandra, and we can just go straight down, 180 seconds or less. What specific actions can CEOs take to ensure that DE&I become a priority for a company's strategy? What if you had your way to, with a wand?
Right. Well, there are many things that CEOs can do, but I would say 3 is the tone from the top. I think that is absolutely important. Not just say, but do as well. So I think that's one. The other thing is, and this is not just for LGBTQ plus people, but this is in general. The other thing is, and I call them the technicalities. Go through your benefits, your compensation. Are there gaps? Are the benefits for the same-sex people in the same-sex relationship people the same as for married people? How can, those kind of things. It is a quite technical thing. But if you're a global company, you need to do that in 45 countries. Then it's a lot of work. And then I would say the ERGs in all the employee resource groups, they play a very important role because they stimulate, I would say, the grassroots movement, and they bring the topics that the executives need to listen to and need to act upon. And then as part of the tone from the top is the executives need to show up when those ERGs are meeting, and because showing up matters.
So I subscribe to all three of those things. I may take it in a slightly different direction, if you don't mind, because I think all three of those things are critical ingredients, and we all should be focusing on them. I think what's changed over the last 2 years as we've worked through the pandemic conditions and put a tremendous amount of stress on all of our employees, but in particular also the groups which require the most attention and have suffered to a greater degree, is around mental health. And Amit and I were having a bit of a conversation around this earlier as well, that in addition to everything that we do around tone from the top, around inclusivity, we also have to acknowledge, I think, and recognize again, tone from the top, that mental health matters. We launched a very specific program around that was kind of grassroots around mental health first aiders within the organization. So we trained up employees who brought that enthusiasm themselves to make them visible champions and leaders within the organization, someone who actually has a face, as opposed to your employee assistance program, which is a 24-hour hotline. You know, someone who you know that in confidence you can go to and has the training and the ability. So to pivot the question maybe in a slightly different direction, I think all of that is critically important, and what comes on top of that and has for the last 2 years has been an increased focus and necessity to also acknowledge mental health challenges.
That's great.
I subscribe to all that. So in the interest of time, I will
We're building.
I will
Can we
build
disagree on something?
I'm sure we will. I will. But to build on that, I want to focus on sort of the external part, because the CEOs and companies are extremely powerful. They matter a lot in every country in the world. And so when we are seeing things like we talked about, bills being passed that are targeting the most vulnerable people in our world, we were talking before, trans kids, we're talking teenagers, we're talking children who are 7, 8 years old. We need people in positions of power. We need CEOs, we need boards, we need executives, we need everyone in companies to say this is wrong, this is harmful, this is unethical, and we won't stand for it. So we need the words to happen, and then we need action to follow. We need people to say, we're not going to do business with you. We are not going to put money into PACs that support people who are targeting children. There's a lot of action that needs to be taken, and I think we have seen the business community be so effective on LGBTQ issues in the past, on many topics. You mentioned North Carolina. There's a huge impact. People came together, a lot of people saying we're going to boycott the state. It stopped that bill. It changed what happened. But now we are seeing wave after wave of horrible things happening. In Texas, the governor of Texas said that providing gender-affirming care to your kids, what your doctor recommends that you do, what the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, American Psychiatric Association, the governor is saying doing what these doctors and mental health experts say is child abuse, and we might take your children away from you if you do what the medical profession says to do. That should be outrageous to everyone, and so we just need more leaders and companies to say that's wrong and we won't stand for it.
So I love that, because you and I work very closely together on that work. And I'm going to just push a little bit here. Companies have been doing it for years, right? Standing by our community, speaking up for our community. How do we help them along? Do you have any advice for CEOs on how we can? It is a marathon, not a sprint. It's never ending. It's a fire hose right now of bad legislation. It's still illegal in 70 countries to be LGBTQ, still punishable by death in 11 of those. So how do we empower and enable and give them a tool set to do that? Do you have any view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very complicated, and it's a lot of the work that we have lots of teams doing, but I think to sort of boil it down, we need, you said the tone from the top, we need to have the will to want to do something. We see that in some companies, they have the will. The will is not enough, but the will is a prerequisite. It is necessary, but not sufficient. And unfortunately, I think we still see a lot of companies who don't quite have the will to do something, especially in countries outside, it's countries where it might be more difficult. So I think we need people to commit to say, we are going to make a difference. We need people to speak up, and then we need them to use their authority. And that's very complicated. It's going to look different in different places. In some places, that's going to be discussions behind closed doors that might be most effective in certain contexts. In other places, that is going to be, we will not do business. We will not do business with you or your country or the state or this jurisdiction unless you change policies. We will not fund you. We will not put political donations. So there are all sorts of different levers to pull. And if we're talking about the whole globe, I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all solution. But I hope people who are listening take away, we need to start with the will and the commitment to want to do something. The voice matters. We need people to speak up. We still don't have a lot of people speaking up. And then we need to make sure there are specific, concrete actions. And we have a lot of people at GLAAD and the Trevor Project and many other organizations who are standing by willing to support for those who are trying to navigate what the specific actions are.
That's great. And last but not least again, so how does this sound to you? Is this a practice that you're used to, that you take on? Or is this a very Western way to do advocacy?
Actually, I was just reflecting on everything that they were saying, and I was just thinking about this term that we talk about, representation, which is to do with the numbers and the metrics. And I feel while that is important, it's about representation in terms of hiring, in terms of making sure you have the pipeline, etc. But I think what's most important is the day-to-day experience of these folks in our organizations. And therefore, how comfortable do they feel coming into work? What's the psychological safety that we offer them in the context of work? These become really important, especially for people who are transitioning in particular. When you think about even documentation, when you think about that documentation that exists, how easy is it for people who are transitioning from one gender to the other? Are their birth certificates really going through a simple, accessible, understandable process? All these things become important both from an external point of view as well as an internal point of view.
That's amazing. I think that's important too, because we look a lot externally, and then internally, how can we make the day to day? That's fabulous. I'm going to stick with you for a second.
Sure.
I'm really curious your perspective on what workplace advice would you give to the LGBTQI community? We have probably people viewing all over the world. What would you share with them?
I think we need advice from them. I don't think we have any advice to give them, because they have been at the margins. And to now be in a position to say that, let us tell you now how to behave in this world, it needs to be completely subverted. There's no advice to give them. I think it's more important for us to hear them and listen to their point of view.
That's great. Christiana, the business world, banking, finance, that's the world that you live in, right? How do we as LGBTQI community, what is the financial empowerment? What does that look like in terms of, as we're in these crises, as we're looking at inflation around the world and more pressure coming in, how do we empower and build back better in that, from that perspective for marginalized communities, not just LGBTQI?
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time reflecting on this, and I'm glad that you widened the aperture, because I think those issues are broader than just this community. And it goes back to what I talked about earlier, doing business that represents your values, right? So when we have thought about ways in which the financial services industry touches many, many aspects of the economy and society. When we, for example, do our regular course of funding our business through the capital markets with bond issuance, we look for opportunities to partner with firms who are coming from underrepresented communities, women-owned broker-dealers, Black-owned broker-dealers. We focus a lot also on the veteran community. We're working with our clients on ways in which we can enable through financial instruments for them to also be working with underserved communities. So if you think about, we've been on this journey now for 70 plus years, focused on supplier power, right? Concentrate your number of suppliers with the smallest possible number that you can. What if you flip that on its head and found a financial services provider who can take the risk away from that so that you can work with a broader, more diverse group of suppliers in ideally economically underserved communities, and potentially also open up some social opportunities around that as well. So I think certainly, banks, financial service providers have significant opportunities, but I encourage all of us in the business opportunity to think about how do our business practices beyond just what we do in the HR organization express these values.
So thank you for that. I am going to turn to the audience now. Oh, great. We have early questions. I'm going to start right there. I can't see your name from here, but please introduce yourself and ask.
Hi, I'm Radhika. I have a question for Asha, but firstly, thank you for mentioning that it'll be nice to have advice from the LGBTQI community. I think it makes it more inclusive. And I agree and completely acknowledge your point that the Indian mythology already states whatever you mentioned. But I also want to understand that the Indian government is a little against the community, although Section 377, as you mentioned, has been revoked. How do you think we can create a movement of this particular issue? And also, how is Mahindra & Mahindra helping the people of the community feel safer?
Sure. Yeah. Lots of questions. There were 3 questions in there. Firstly, thank you for the questions. I actually did some research around this belief around the government and and their approach towards this particular community. And I was quite surprised to know that in 2019, on our Republic Day, on Jan 26, 2019, the president of the country actually honored the 3rd highest civilian honor to Natraj Nartaki, who is actually a transgender woman, who's a transgender now a woman, and for her accomplishments in Bharatnatyam. And just imagine the 3rd highest civilian honor being presented to this particular lady, at that platform. So while politicians have been quite undivided on, or rather quite divided on many aspects in our country, I think there are some aspects, especially on these, where we have seen some kind of great collaboration and unison. For example, the first trans lawyer, the first trans nurse, a transgender welfare board. In fact, in one of the smallest southern cities, there is a hostel for around 40 transgender students who were actually thrown out of their homes by parents, and actually the government actually embraced them. So 4 to 5 of our largest states, we're actually seeing some great actions, and there is a lot of data that's available. Maybe it's not out there, it's not being spoken about as yet, but it does exist, and there are pockets of great resonance for the community, and they should feel fantastic about the things that are happening. Having said that, it's a journey, and a lot needs to be done. And that same holds true for the Mahindra Group too. We've been in a classically male-dominated business. We started with the tractor business. We started with rugged SUVs, and therefore we were classically talking to men in semi-urban and rural parts of the country. But I must tell you that in the last couple of years, and especially in the last couple of months, we've had dealerships which have only women. And actually, we believe it's great for business. It's not about diversity, and while that's important, but we do believe that with sophisticated luxury vehicles coming into the fold, women can actually do a great job. So there is some work to be done in the community per se, but one of our group companies, which is Mahindra Logistics, they have actually created some great policies for same-sex partners, which includes 12 weeks of adoption leave in case you want to adopt a child. There is medical insurance for same-sex partners, and also there is compassionate leave in case there is a bereavement in the family, which is very much the same for any other member of, or for everyone else. So these are small steps that we are taking, and these policies are now going to be extended to other parts of the company, and hopefully we shall be seeing a different scenario when we meet again in the next year or so. Yeah, thank you for asking the question.
Yes, right.
Thank you. As saying as Radical and a global shaper from the World Economic Forum from Colombia, I want to tell you a short story. I was talking with another queer friend, another shaper, and we were saying that was quite a representation of power, and I think there are less than 10%. I would guess that less than 3% of queer people within Davos. So how many LGBTQ people have power, or who are making the decisions? And I wanted to hear, I think, from all of you, your position on that. I mean, if Davos is the representation of power within business and government, and we're just this group of people that maybe some of us, including me, are gay or LGBTQ+, where are we? Why are we not empowered?
I think that's a great question. I can start with you, and maybe, Sandra, you want to grab it too. But I would say in the United States, on the Fortune 500 list, there are 4 out CEOs. One of them is on our panel today, right, Sander? And then there's 3 others. And that's all we have on the Fortune 500 power list. So I think and all the places of power, that's what we've been working on, is making sure that our community is represented in those places of power so that we have a voice at the table, and that's what we're continuing to work on. And I think it's very insightful. I'm so glad you're here, and those are the right questions to be asking everywhere you go, not just in the LGBTQI panel. But I'll hand it over to you, Sander, too.
No, I think you're right. I was looking up the number, but I think there's like 41 openly LGBT board directors on the Fortune 500 or something like that.
Board directors, yeah.
Small numbers.
Yeah.
So let's say we need to keep pushing, and I would say we all have the power at the end of the day, because we are, in a way, and it doesn't matter big or small, we're all role models. So you say we should listen to the advice of the LGBTQ community. I'm absolutely in agreement with that. But I have also one piece of advice for everybody in the community, and this is, bring your story to work. Don't leave it by the door, and tell your story, because that's what people need to hear. People need to hear different stories, and we're talking LGBTQ now, but it can be about religion or whatever. People need to hear stories to open their eyes that people who are different than they are also people. It's as simple as that. So if we all bring our story to work, and we tell our story, and we feel we're proud of our story, and we feel no hesitation to tell our story by the coffee machine. You don't have to say, oh, listen, I have to tell you something. No, you can, by the coffee machine, you can tell your story. Yeah? No, but that, you just do it casually. And then one day you'll hear, and you will hear one day from someone says, one day I met this gentleman at the coffee machine, and he told me his story. And it really opened my eyes, because now I feel also confident to tell my story. And it's that, so where we all have the power, but we do need to take the risk to tell the story that is about us and not leave the story at the door.
Can I just jump in as well? Because I sort of think in this on a systemic level and then on a personal level. So on the systemic level, when we're talking about why we don't have enough LGBTQ CEOs, well, the CEO is the last step for Fortune 500 companies on a series of 10,000 micro steps that happened along the way. And when we're talking about in the very first journeys that LGBTQ people have in some places, in some countries they're being raised in places where they say people like you should be put to death. In other places they are saying people like you don't deserve to exist, or we're trying to erase you. I think sometimes we forget the human aspect. I just wanted to share a quick story. I was in Texas recently. I was talking about Texas before, and was hearing from families of trans kids, and was hearing a story from a family had a teenage trans girl who had a fever of over 100 degrees, so they were going to take her to the hospital. And then they realized, well, if we bring her to the hospital and they realize that she's on puberty blockers, they might say that's a violation of the governor's order and take her away and give her to Child Protective Services. So they decided not to bring their sick daughter to the hospital because they were afraid the government would take her away from receiving medical care.
In the United States in 2020.
And I just share that because, I hope that girl will become the CEO of a company, but that there are a lot of steps that have to happen on the way, and part of that has to be that we are treating people with basic dignity and respect, which is not happening in many places. And then, which ties a little to my sort of personal, the sort of personal level, the systemic changes we all need to make. We know there are huge systemic changes, business decisions that need to be made, government decisions, and I think sometimes that can seem overwhelming. But every single person in this room, every single person watching has the power in their life to make a difference for LGBTQ people. I think one of the most powerful statistics we have at the Trevor Project is that having just one accepting adult in an LGBTQ young person's life can reduce their risk of suicide by 40%, 40%. That means every single one of you in the steps that you take, small things, love and kindness, expressing love and kindness and support, that can save lives. And I think if we can all take that into our daily lives, we will save more lives of people and we will lead to better outcomes, not just for LGBTQ people, but for everyone.
And then we'll have more CEOs. And I do want to say on the other side of that too, when you look at this next generation and the Generation Z and Generation Alpha, and you see that more and more people feel comfortable being their true and authentic selves. And in some studies, you know, you see it 20% through the Gallup poll in the United States, but we've been running studies ourselves that include the Q, and so it's LGBTQ, and we expand the age from 18 to 34, and you can see nearly 40% of Gen Zers identify as LGBTQ. So I think the pressure's coming, and we're seeing corporations feel it, right? They're feeling it. So now when something happens on a high voltage situation, we're getting calls not only from the C-suite, but from the ERG. And I always say the call's coming from both sides of the house because they want to talk about how do we resolve this, especially when it becomes a very public issue. How do we resolve this? And the CEO wants to do the right thing. And I think everyone in this room is looking to do the right thing. And like Amit said, it's small steps, and it makes big, powerful difference.
But it's getting more difficult to do the right thing, unfortunately, because the world's getting so polarized. Because if you, I live in Florida. If you look at that bill in Florida, there is, let's say, that's a bill made for political reason to make an issue of an issue that is not an issue.
Right.
Yeah, and that's. Yeah. And this is sort of to rally the base, and I think that is it's almost like you look at it, what's the point? No school is discussing in second grade whatever. But now we're making a law to not discuss up to the third grade a whole range of things that never get discussed. Anyway, but it is really annoying. And then now you, I mean, when you're a CEO, I mean, you want to do the right thing. But, you know, you have a business to run. There's 300 of these laws. You cannot say, well, in every state where there is one of those laws, I'm not doing business anymore. So it's getting harder to sort of navigate the whole system. Unfortunately, because of the polarized situation that we're in. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I mean, I think it should make us stronger to push back harder. But you sort of start to think, where is this going to end?
Well,
and
I think
that's the concern. And I mean, then there's the whole abortion discussion, which is the next level. Where is this going to stop?
Well, I think, you know, that's a great question because there's a couple of, I think, lessons that we can learn from what happened in Florida, and that is that if you have internal values at a company, they need to be external, and you can't falter on that. You got to put your foot down or say your point of view because you're going to be held accountable on both sides of it now. And so stand for what you believe in and do it the right way out of the gate is oftentimes what we talk about. And the other thing, there is a little, it's not an end-all in the United States, but it is a help, is we do have a piece of legislation called the Equality Act that we do need the senators in the United States to hear from business leaders directly about. They want to hear about that LGBTQ matters to you, because I hear from these senators who say, I have CEOs who come into my office and they never bring up LGBTQ. They'll bring up women, they'll bring up racial equity. They will not bring up LGBTQ. So that is one little step that we can take away from this. And now I'm being told that we need to wrap. We could go on for a long time, obviously. There's a lot to discuss here. I will say thank you very much to you all. I think if we take the top learnings here, there's a lot of work to do. And Davos and the people who are here and the people in this room and who are watching can make one small effort to make big change. And if you make one small effort, it'll lead to another, to another. So we appreciate you
Can
all.
we do a last piece of advice for everyone in the room and who's watching this? Look up the Trevor Project and give them some money.
Yes,
Amen.
perfect. I love it. And I just officially have to close out with saying this session captures the work of the World Economic Forum's Center for the New Economy and Society, a platform that aims to shape prosperous, resilient, and equitable economies and societies that create opportunity for all. Thank you all for being here today.
That was a very nice.